Hey guys, my name is Mmr, and today I wanted to do something a little bit different and take a look back at how far Rainbow Six Siege has progressed over this last 2.5 years. This game has gone through a lot of changes since it was initially released, and I thought it would just be fun to take a look back just to see how far this game has come. And so early on, when the game first released, it wasn't in the most stable of conditions. There was a lot of server instability problems, people rubber banding all over the place, that was a big issue. There was a lot of bugs and glitches, and while glitches isn't anything new to Rainbow Six Siege, let's be honest, we're still dealing with some pretty bad glitches that people are exploiting even to this day. There was one in particular that was probably the worst that was ever introduced. There was a way that defenders were able to jump outside even before offense was able to spawn on in, make their way on over towards the offensive spawn locations, and as soon as the droning phase ended, take everyone out. Thankfully, Ubisoft was able to hotfix this problem, at least if memory serves, but I distinctly remember there was that brief period where on some games it was just a nightmare because people were constantly jumping outside of a building and it just ruined the experience. Like, I really think that that was one of the worst exploits that has ever been added into Rainbow Six Siege. This is also the moment when Kapkan traps look like gigantic lightsabers. Because why not? Moving on over into Season 1, this is when we're first introduced to Buck and Frost. Buck was a different beast back in the day, not only because his skeleton key gadget was way more effective at taking people out up close, but it was nowhere near as destructive. His gadget went through a lot of iterations over the years to try to make it more destructive so that you could vault through walls, for example, but also had the downside that it wasn't nearly as effective at taking people out up close. When he first came out, it was basically the complete opposite. Now, he wasn't terrible, like, don't get me wrong, he was still a very fun operator, but he's definitely not the operator that a lot of people have fallen in love with to this day. As for Frost, she was basically overpowered. Now, it took people a while to realize how great she was, and that was mainly because a lot of people just weren't accustomed to using shotguns, and her Super 90 shotgun was incredible. There was a, I want to say brief, but it wasn't really brief. It took a couple of seasons for people to really realize how strong these shotguns were, and the Super 90 was at the top of that list for basically being some of the best weapons in the game. It changed the meta. It changed the way that you played the game. Why use any other weapon when you could basically just use this and literally snipe people across rooms and across the map? It was that powerful. On top of that, no one knew how to work around her gadget. The common strategy when vaulting through a window is to look at the ground and then take it out as soon as you vault on in. That wasn't a thing back in the day. People had to learn the hard way, and so there was that brief moment in Rainbow Six Siege history where she really changed up the meta and was incredibly powerful. The last thing I remember about this season is I believe that this is the time when Ubisoft added in the feature where if you're playing ranked on defense and you win an objective, you can't play on that objective again. It locks it and you have to play somewhere else. There was a time where you could play the same objective over and over and over again, and of course that didn't add a lot of variety into a game that is all about, experimenting and trying out different points, and so honestly, this is probably one of the better changes that they made to rank, and it happened very early on. Moving on over into Season 2, this is when we're introduced to Valkyrie and of course the god that was Blackbeard. I don't think people remember how powerful Blackbeard was when he first came out. His shield never broke. I mean, yes, it happened occasionally, but it happened so infrequently that people didn't even know that it was a feature. Literally, people thought that he had just this invincible shield at the end of his weapon, and he would never die outside of a window. The entire game revolved around trying to take out Blackbeard. He was one of the most overpowered operators that has ever been introduced into Rainbow Six Siege. Valkyrie was no slouch either. When she came out, she had access to 4 cameras up from the standard 3 that we're all used to, and her shotgun was overpowered. This really was the moment when everyone was playing with shotguns on defense. Like, that was the meta. Even Pulse got into the mix. His gadget, the way that it worked back then, was that you could switch from his scanner over to his primary weapon instantly. So you could figure out where they were located as soon as they stopped, switching over to his primary weapon, and then blast them with the shotgun. I distinctly remember going on these ridiculous streaks with him because of that very mechanic. Thankfully, Just in the next season, the shotgun meta got a swift kick to the knee and they nerfed it severely. So it was basically season 1 and season 2, everyone was playing shotguns, and then directly after that, it kind of got to where we are today, where they're still useful, but they're nowhere near the powerhouse that they were. Speaking of season 3, this is when we got Capitao and Cav. A lot of major changes happened this season. Not only did a lot of existing operators get a rework, Twitch, for example, went from having a normal drone and 1 Twitch drone to getting 2 shock drones. That wasn't a thing before. Blackbeard, his shield finally got nerfed. The reign of Blackbeard, while still in effect because his shield had 150 HP, was way down from having 800 when he first came out. That was a big deal. And Doc can now heal his teammates. For the longest time, Doc was only able to revive with his gadget. He wasn't able to provide any assistance while people were still alive, and so allowing him to heal was also a big deal. This was also the time when they introduced the Claymore and the Impact Nade. When the Impact Nade was first introduced, I did not realize how influential it was going to be over the years. When it came out, I and a lot of others, I think, just assumed that it was going to be a way to maybe deal some splash damage against the enemy. You knew someone was in the adjacent room, throw it on in there, hopefully deal like 40% HP or something like that, and then as soon as you got into a fight with them, you could hopefully take them down with your primary weapon. Like, I thought that that was what the Impact Nade was going to be, a lesser version of the normal nade. This thing is all about opening up different lines of sight, either on the objective itself so that you can move between the sites faster, or when you're roaming around just to catch the enemy by surprise. But when it first came out, it took a while for people to understand that, and people were just using it as another way to deal damage. Season 3 is also when they introduced the Muzzle Break, and when it came out, it was the best attachment in the game. It practically made every single weapon into a laser beam. There was a glitch where it was originally meant to only reduce the first shot recoil, but it reduced every single shot. Like, you could just hold down the weapon and every shot was as if it was that first one, and you had pinpoint lack accuracy. It didn't take them very long to correct that issue. Capitao, as I'm sure you guys all remember, had access to nades back in the day. He really was one of the most versatile operators you could have on offense. His weapon hit like a truck, his gadget allowed him to zone out the enemy, and of course, the nades are one of the best gadgets you can have on offense, and he put all of those 3 together, it made him one of the most reliable and versatile operators you could have. Of course, things have gone downhill since then, but there was that brief window where he really shined for the offensive team. Moving on over into Season 4, this is when we're introduced to Acog and Hibana. Hibana was a game changer. For the longest time, all we had was Thermite, and she really mixed up how we approached the objective. Not only because she was able to open up 3 different walls, but now we could have a Thermite and a Hibana on offense. Like, if you really want to get through those reinforcements, it is now a possibility. This was also when a bunch of the old operators saw some reworks. Tachanka, for example, finally got a shield at the end of his turrets. As we all know, it didn't do a whole lot to his pick rate. It didn't make him viable. But if you can imagine, he was even worse back in the day. He didn't even have a shield. Like, he was just this sitting target, and he finally now has a little bit of defense, so that was a step in the right direction. Fuse now has a larger blast radius on his cluster charges, and he went from having 2 to 3. This took people a while to work around. There was a brief moment where people just did not know how to work around Fuse. Kind of like when the game first came out, people just didn't understand when to run away or when they heard that noise to get out of the room. There was some growing pains there. And then this is also when Smoke was able to throw his gadget across the map. For the longest time, Smoke was only able to kind of lob it 4 feet in front of him. It didn't give him a whole lot of versatility. This gave him the ability to really put his gadget wherever he wanted to. And then probably one of the more controversial changes is that the SMG-11 lost access to the Acog scope. This was a very divisive change. On the one hand, you had people that were ecstatic about this news. Yes, you could rationalize it all you want, but getting sniped from across the map by a secondary weapon just wasn't satisfying. On the other hand, though, a lot of people assumed that this was the only way that Smoke was a viable operator, and as soon as you took that away, that his SMG-11 would be worthless. As we all know, that's not what happened whatsoever. Smoke is still one of the strongest operators of the game, probably due in part also because of the adjustment to his gadget. He can now throw it farther. That probably helped. But there was that brief time period where people thought this was going to be the end days for Smoke, but thankfully that didn't happen. And then finally, and probably one of the most significant adjustments that Ubisoft has ever made to Rainbow Six Siege, is that they moved the rank timer from 4 minutes a round down to 3. A lot of people weren't happy with this change because many people assumed that you needed that full 4 minutes to actually play the objective. Because Rainbow Six Siege is a more methodical, tactical FPS, you thought that you would need to take your time clearing out every single room and then pushing the objective room after that. In reality though, most people didn't use that 4 minutes to slowly move methodically around the map. They just never pressured the objective until they needed to. Most people just stood outside of windows hoping that someone on defense would get bored and then take them out as soon as they reared their head out. It didn't make for the most satisfying or action-packed gameplay. No, we didn't want the game to become, COD for example, but it definitely, in my opinion, was one of the better changes that they ever made to rank. Moving on over into year 2, we have Jackal and Mira. When everyone first saw Jackal, everyone thought that he was going to be overpowered. And admittedly, when he first came out, he actually was overpowered. His weapon hit like a truck, it was laser beam-like accurate, it had a crazy fast reload time, it was the perfect weapon. Now, it was nowhere near as overpowered as Ela when she first came out, it wasn't to that extent, but it pretty much didn't have any flaws compared to all of the other weapons in the game. Like, when it came out, he was strong for that very reason. Now, of course, they did nerf him pretty quickly after that, and then he became a fairly average operator. Everyone thought that he was going to be overpowered though because of his special ability. Being able to scan someone's footprints and know exactly where they were, everyone thought that that was going to be game-changing. The real game changer though was Mira. If I had to take a guess, Ubisoft is really proud of this operator, not only because she's well balanced, but because she changes the way that offense and defenses has to approach an objective in a positive way. She's not game breaking and forces you to adapt because she's overpowered, it's because of her simplistic mechanic that just changes the objective and those lines of sight that makes for some really satisfying gameplay. Season 2 was also when Glaz got access to his thermal optic. The thermal optic was in place because for the longest time, Glaz did not have a very high pick raise. They increased his damage, they increased his rate of fire. It didn't matter what Ubisoft did to him, he just was at the bottom tier for pick rate and wins. Like, he just wasn't a very strong operator. As soon as this happened though, it went on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. They kept the high damage, they kept the high rate of fire, and now he can see through smoke and of course see anyone glowing out in the distance. He was so strong that you would have teams that would work their entire strategy around this one operator. Ash would bring smokes, Glaz of course would have his smokes, you would just have everyone on your team throwing those things down, and then he would waltz on the objective, and because he did so much damage, he would be able to practically one-shot everyone that he came across, especially those roaming one-speed operators. It was terrible. The last major thing that Ubisoft did with this update is that they fixed an MMR bug. I'm sure you guys remember this because it was a serious issue where if you won a game, the entire team or most of the enemy team would leave the round before it ended. This way, they lost no MMR, absolutely no matchmaking, and then your team, for some reason, I don't even know why this happened, you would only get like 2 points for your ranked, hardly anything. You would expect to get like 100 or like 50, for example, but because almost all of them left the server, there was this weird glitch where you got practically nothing. Ranked wasn't in a very good place when this became widespread, and thankfully, this was a season when it finally was solved. Moving on over into Season 2, this is kind of the dark ages of Rainbow Six Siege, where we have Operation Health. Now, Operation Health, I firmly believe, was a good thing for the game, but during that time, it was hard to see the benefits. With this, we got the one-step matchmaking, which was a great improvement on queue times. That was probably one of the best changes that happened with Operation Health. We did get the new servers, which was a bit of a rocky ride. They would implement them. They didn't seem much better, sometimes even worse, but I think over this last year, they've made some great changes to those servers, and now things are a lot better. And this was also when we got alpha packs. We never had alpha packs before Operation Health. All in all, though, this really was when Ubisoft was trying to lay the foundation and groundwork for this game. It took some time, and of course, a lot of people weren't really happy with it when it was happening, but this was kind of Ubisoft's commitment, like, hey, we're in this for the long haul. We realize that this game has some some systemic problems, and we're gonna solve this now so that we're not fighting it all throughout into the future with upcoming DLC. Now, as for Year 2 Season 3, this is when the reign of terror of Ella begins. Now, I know she's been nerfed since then. She's nowhere near as crazy as she used to be, but there was a good 6-month period where she was the most top-picked operator on defense forever. 6 months. I think she had an 80% pick rate. Ubisoft even said when they introduced new operators after she was released, she still kept that 80% pick rate. No other operator has had that. Blackbeard back in the day didn't even achieve that. His pick rate even dipped when new operators were released. Ella was that much of a monster. Season 3 is also when Kapkan and Blitz saw some upgrades. Blitz can now sprint, which was a pretty big game changer. That made him significantly more viable. Apparently not viable enough because Ubisoft buffed him a couple seasons later. But also, Kapkan saw some lovin'. Kapkan has come a long way since release. No longer does he have those lightsaber lines across the doorways and windows, but he also isn't able to one-shot people anymore. This was fairly controversial when it happened. Kapkan mains were pretty sad because it was really satisfying taking someone out with the Kapkan trap, but I think all in all, he is in a much better place right now, not only because he has these stealthy gadgets, but also because they do a significant amount of damage. And then lastly, another very divisive aspect about this season is I believe that this is the time that not only did they remove a bunch of maps from the rotation, Ranked got a much smaller pool, they removed Favela and Yacht from Casual, for example, but I also believe that this is when they removed the Acogs from Bandit and Jaeger. As you can imagine, these two operators, for 2 years at this point, had access to this attachment slot. Taking that away changed the way how you played those two operators, and honestly, it was a nerf. Like, it was a nerf to those two characters. Ubisoft has come out and said that they're happy with the change and they're not going to go back, but I know that there was a lot of Jaeger mains and Bandit mains out there that were definitely not too satisfied with that very significant change to their playstyle. Now, as for the final season of Year 2, admittedly, not a whole lot happened. Goo Mine got a faster recharge, so Legion got a buff. Bandit actually saw a nerf where he no longer has access to 3 barbed wire. They dropped it down to 2. Twitch saw some slight adjustments. Really, there wasn't a lot of significant changes there. Where we saw the biggest ones, though, was when we moved on over into Year 3, where we got Lion, Finka, Outbreak, and of course the big nerf to Ella. Her reign of terror is finally over, but it was basically swapped out with Lion, who now is the most overpowered operator in the game, and everything revolves around him, so not a whole lot has changed. But yeah, guys, that is about it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. I had a lot of fun going back and just seeing how much this game has progressed over the last 2.5 years. There's been some hiccups along the way. Ubisoft isn't perfect, but I think all in all, from start to finish, this game has gotten better and better over the years, and it was just fun to see that progress. Before I go, though, let me know what your favorite season was. Was it because of certain operators, a certain playstyle? Was it because of a certain nerf or an update? Give me your guys' thoughts down below in the comment section. But yeah, guys, until tomorrow, have a good one and take it easy.